He was acquitted of the three most serious charges: attempted murder of a police officer, assault with a deadly weapon, and battery against a police officer. And then the jury hung on three other charges.
Hey, it's Conrad with the First Responder Wellness Podcast. Today is episode number 58, and I'm so glad you're here. Welcome to the show. As we know, law enforcement around the country has been in the bullseye for hate crimes for a number of years. There have been tons of stories of officers getting attacked and shot and just, in a bad way. It's a tragedy that keeps on happening. And today on the show, my guest tells her story about when she was brutally attacked when doing her job. Meagan McCarthy was a deputy sheriff for the San Bernardino County Sheriff's Department in California for 6 years and was involved in an on-duty shooting, which was caught on video and highly publicized. The suspect attempted to execute Meagan after brutally beating her. Well, 4 years later, the trial began, and due to a failed law enforcement legislation, the suspect was acquitted and subsequently freed from custody. Today on the show, Meagan tells her story and talks about her mental health journey after this horrible incident. And as you can imagine, it took a toll on her. She also talks about what is needed from law enforcement leadership to help officers stay healthy on the job. Her name may be familiar to you because she's been a Fox News contributor for a while and has been on about every news network in the country advocating for change in the mental health system for first responders. So stay tuned for this compelling conversation. Hey, I'm very grateful that you're here listening to the show, and I invite you to subscribe if you haven't already. Then invite your tribe to join in as well. I drop a new episode every Wednesday, so share the link if you find this content helpful and informative. And thanks again for being here, and now here's my conversation with Meagan McCarthy. Meagan, welcome to the First Responder Wellness Podcast. It's so great to have you on the program. Thanks for joining me today.
Thank you so much for having me. This is long overdue, and I'm really happy to be here.
Yeah, so I want to know a little bit about your story. I know I was reading some news articles about what happened to you a few years ago, but just to bring our audience up to speed of where does your story start?
Yeah, well, my story started on September 4th of 2019, which was the day that I was involved in a critical incident. I was a deputy sheriff for the San Bernardino County Sheriff's Department. I had been on the department about 3.5 years, and I was the first person in my family to go into law enforcement. I come from a family of business men and women, and I just felt the calling to go into public service. So fast forward 3 years, I'm on patrol and I respond to a 911 call of a mom in need of help. It was the first call of the day. We ride one-man units, typically one-man response, like the majority of places across the country. Our department was understaffed, but we were in a very, very busy city. So I worked for the city of Victorville, which is the number 9 most dangerous city in California. And I loved it. I had great admin, great partners. And anyway, I respond to this 911 call, and the mom is saying, oh my God, get my son out of here. I want him gone. And I start heading to that address. And as I'm en route, dispatch tells us that she is no longer communicating, but she's still connected to 911. So the dispatcher can still hear a commotion going on in the background, but she can't make it out. So it bumps my response up to a priority 1. No lights and sirens, just get there as fast as you can. As soon as I park my unit, about 2 houses down from the address, I start walking up the driveway to make contact with the mom, the reporting party, and the front door flies open. And it's the suspect, her son. He comes walking directly towards me. We've made eye contact, and he's aggressive. I can tell that this is going to be a situation. So the mom is right behind him. She's carrying a knife in one hand, and she's on the phone with dispatch in the other. So based on everything that I've, my training experience, everything that I know, my instincts are like, what happened in that house where this mom has now armed herself with a knife? Like, is there somebody else in the house? I need to contain the situation. So I go to the son and I'm just telling him, relax, what's going on? And he immediately begins to verbally assault. He's telling me if we fight, he's going to kill me. He's going to headbutt the expletive out of me. So I'm trying to de-escalate. Anyway, I put his hands at the small of his back. And within 17 seconds of me arriving, he turns around and now we're tug-of-warring over my hand. He won't let go of my wrist. He ends up breaking the base of my thumb from pulling so hard. I go through all the motions, the, verbal tactics, the de-escalation, control holds, defensive tactics, nothing is working. I take out my baton. I tell him I'm going to hit you. He grabs it from me, throws it on the ground. And now we're full on fighting. We fought for about 2.5 minutes. He ends up grabbing the bun at the base of my head and pulls me down, trying to knee me in the face. In the course of all of that, he disconnects my radio that's connected
Mm,
through my back. And I'm telling dispatch, we call it I'm 415, meaning I'm fighting. And I hear nothing. It's radio
mm,
silence. And
mm,
it was a very harrowing feeling to feel like I was in the middle of this by myself. And we're fighting, and I'm starting to lose consciousness. He begins punching me in the face over and over. He breaks my eye socket, and I can see the curtains coming, and I'm gonna pass out. So I take out my gun and I tell him I'm gonna shoot you. It was my last ditch effort to de-escalate. I didn't want to kill this son in front of his mom. I'm a mother.
mhm,
I wouldn't want to see that. And then so in my mind, I'm like, that would give me every bit of a reason to stop fighting if I knew that I could potentially be shot. It didn't. It escalated the situation further. And lo and behold, there was a neighbor in an upstairs bedroom in a neighboring house that begins recording it at this time. So this video was captured. It was, on the internet, and we fall to the ground. I take aim at his head and I miss, and he traps my hand above my head. And now we're fighting over my gun. A round gets discharged into the ground, and he is able to overpower me and take my gun out of my hand. And I remember pleading with him, like, please, please don't. And so I turn onto my hands and knees and I look up at him, and he is pointing the gun at my head. And I hear the
mm,
trigger click, and my brain couldn't understand how I wasn't just shot. I loaded my gun that morning. I knew it was loaded. I just saw a round get fired in the ground, but my heart's working, my legs are working. So I turn and run for cover, and he shoots at my back as I'm running away. And by the grace of God, a dispatcher knew that I wasn't communicating. So she sent everybody to me. And as soon as I find a little bush to hide behind, three of my partners turn down the cul-de-sac lights and sirens. They take his attention. He walks towards them, shoots at them. They get into a gunfight. He's taken to the hospital. I'm taken to the hospital. And that's where the next 5 years would lead me down this mental
mm.
health journey.
Wow. Well, I'm really sorry that happened to you, and that those experiences. And I just from what I've read online is that he was acquitted on some of the charges against him.
Yes, he was acquitted of the three most serious charges:
Mm,
attempted murder of a police officer, assault with a deadly weapon, and battery against a police officer. And then the jury hung on three other charges, including
mm,
removal of a peace officer's firearm. And he was ultimately found guilty of negligent discharge of a firearm, which is a
mm.
misdemeanor. So we
Wow.
went to trial. I was cross examined for 3 days on the stand. And because of failed California law, I had a jury of people that had implicit bias towards law enforcement, and they were allowed to sit there. So he ultimately walked away the following day.
Wow. Wow. That's just a bad example of injustice. I mean, a good example of injustice, however you want to say that. It's just a horrible situation. So, what did that do to you, just mentally, physically, spiritually, all the things?
Well, physically, I'm still dealing with chronic injuries. I have to get injections into my hip every 3 months just to be able to chase my kids around the park or, work out. When we fell into the gravel, the way that I landed, it trapped my hip flexor into my leg. So I don't have full
Mm,
mobility. I have chronic injuries with my thumb and my hand. My face is healed. That's okay. But my greatest struggle was the mental health.
mhm,
As a police officer, you're not allowed to be impacted by situations. You're
mm,
trained to, emotions aside, you have to almost become robotic, and it's day in, day out, call after call. You have to help people on their worst days. So I didn't have the mindset that I could be affected by things. I had been in other fights. This was the first time that I fired my gun, and that I should have died that day. By the grace of
mhm,
God, my gun malfunctioned, which is why it didn't, put a bullet in my forehead. But it really was hard for me. I was ultimately medically retired for PTSD 2 years later, and I became a different mom, a different wife, a different person. I loved my job, so it was very hard for me to walk away from a career that I expected to be there for the next 30 years. I loved my
mhm,
partners. I loved what I did. I loved my community. So on September 5th, when I woke up that day, I had a complete identity crisis. Like, I
mhm,
knew a part of me had died at that scene, but I couldn't understand why I was so impacted until nearly 3 years later.
mhm. So, what did you do when you realized that, you're messed up, and your brain's not working the way it did before, and you had this crisis? What did you start doing? What did you look for? Did you look for help, or what was that process like?
So immediately, our department is great when it comes to critical incidents. They give you 3 days off, go unwind, be with your family, your friends, and then you have to be cleared by a psychologist in order to go back to work. So
Mhm.
I saw a psychologist and they were like, "You are not cleared to go back to work. We need to do some more therapy." So about a week later, I did my first session of EMDR, and that for me was way too soon. I love
Mhm.
EMDR now. I have done it years later, but in the immediate aftermath, it was just too much. I
Mhm.
I started on prescription pills, which was way too much too soon. And, I still had the mindset of I'm fine, I'm good, I'm gonna go back to
Mhm.
work. So I wasn't allowing myself to really heal or to work through it. I was putting a mask on. And I did
Mhm.
this for years. In August of 2021, I attempted suicide. And
Mhm.
that was really when it dawned on me how not okay I was and
Mhm.
how I knew if I didn't speak up and advocate for myself, I was not going to be around much longer. And my
Mhm.
brain was telling me that, my body was telling me that. And that was when I said, okay, I am going to go 110% in on trauma therapy. I found a great therapist who specialized in trauma. And I saw her 3 days a week for a year. And I gave it everything I had to really actually take accountability for not being okay. Because in law enforcement, in the first responder world, you're not allowed to have those feelings.
Mhm. And why do you think that is? Why do you think that it's become such a, or it has been such a stigma historically?
I think historically, people join the military or law enforcement or the fire department or the dispatchers to be that saving grace for people's worst day. When I was called to a house, it wasn't because somebody was having a good day, they were having a bad day.
Sure.
So you
Mhm.
go through the academy and you're taught these people are going to depend on you for life. So you would have to, I've responded to do CPR on a baby not breathing or to pull a body out of, a car on fire or gunshot victims. You deal with so much trauma, you're not allowed to deal with it emotionally. You have to detach. So after so many shifts and years of detachment, that's the only way your body and your brain know how to process it. You go home and it's okay, well, now I'm home, but I have a husband I have to cook for. I have to clean my house. I have to take my kids to soccer, not recognizing that I just spent 12 hours dealing with absolute horror. So
And you're
then it
still carrying that on your shoulder when you come home, right?
exactly, they say leave work at work, but that's so impossible. Like
Mm.
it's not a thing. So then it becomes ingrained to like, okay, well, let's just have a couple beers. That will help.
Mm.
Or let's just take some, antidepressants and that will help. Well, now I almost look at it as like a trash can, right? So you
Mm.
think the beginning of your career, it's a couple pieces of paper and you're able to smush it down, smush it down, smush it down. Well, eventually that trash can folds up. Well, now
Mhm.
your trash is spilling on the ground and your family's having to walk in it. So if you didn't take out the trash early enough, now your
Mhm.
trash can's overflowing. And now that I've given my life to advocating for mental health in the first responder world, I see it from people from the first couple of weeks of the job to people have been retired after 30 years, an astounding career. We all have the same mentality of I didn't think that I could ask for help because I had to be the help for so long.
Mhm. Right. So after your suicide attempt, what was it for you that kind of flipped that switch that says, I've got to speak out, I've got to talk about this?
So I still was pretty silent after that. I was ashamed. I was full of guilt. Not only is a cop's worst nightmare your gun being used against you, but
Mm.
millions and millions and tens of millions of people had seen this. My
Mm.
video went around the globe and it had me in almost like a hermit stage. I was hiding in my
Mm.
bathtub. I was afraid of trash can lids closing. I could no longer go to the grocery store. I couldn't pump my own gas because I felt like everybody would look at me and I was that cop that almost died,
Mm.
So I had the guilt. I didn't really start speaking out until after my trial. So my shooting was September 4th of 2019 and we went to trial the end of May. of 2023. So it was then when I witnessed firsthand the injustice of not allowing law enforcement officers to be victims. And the victim word is very, it's almost like stigma. Everybody has their own
Mm,
definition of what that means. And for me, I don't want to be a victim. I don't want to have a victim mentality, but it's just society ingraining it in our community that even if you were to have been shot or injured, that's what you signed up for. And it circles
mm.
back to the mental health. You signed up for it. What do you mean you're impacted by it? What do you mean you have
Mm.
PTSD and trauma and nightmares? You signed up for this. And
It's almost as if you signed up for it and you're not really human.
exactly. They
You
want
gotta put
you.
aside your humanity.
Yes, and it's like I said, I never went back to work after September 4th of 2019, and our world has changed
Mm,
so drastically. I feel my husband still works for the same department, and I feel for our cops these days. It's a very different culture now, but they want you to be empathetic and soft and human. But the minute you're impacted, it's, well, why would you sign up to be a cop then? You're weak. This is why women shouldn't be
mm,
cops. There's always a reason. And I sat before my peers and I sat before, 13 people who looked at me like I was the villain. Like I
mm,
asked for this. It's my fault that I didn't die. And when he was subsequently released, that's when I spoke up and I said, this is not okay. This cannot be the status quo. Not only are we, yes, we're signing up for a dangerous job, but it's no different than, giving a 17-year-old a driver's license and saying, okay, you're now clear to drive. But if you get hit by a DUI driver, then you signed up for a license.
mm,
Just because you sign up to do a job doesn't mean that you're allowing to be murdered or assaulted or dehumanized. And it's just become this complete culture shift where our cops are looked at as, like you said, inhuman. We're not allowed to be people. So I
mm,
spoke up and I said, if this is happening to me, this is definitely happening to my brothers and sisters. And fortunately, I'm retired. I get a pension, not a paycheck. I'm not afraid to talk about the hard things and have conversations where a lot of people, I talk to them and they can't speak up because they still have to go to work. And law enforcement is the machine. You speak up, you're blacklisted, you're not going to be promoted, you're not going to go to a specialized assignment. So I said, I don't have to worry about these things. I'm going to be a voice for the voiceless. And that's
mm,
really when I began this new path down advocacy, and I love it.
mm. What needs to change from what I call the suck it up culture within first responders?
I think it's very situation dependent. I think if you were to ask my husband, who's been on the full time SWAT team for 8 years and he loves it, he goes to work every day and he thrives. And if you were to ask me, who's a mom, a little bit more emotional, which that that needs to be an accepted quality for law enforcement officers. And I think that's one of the things is we hold ourselves to such a high standard, which is great. You should, but you're also allowed to be affected by things and deal with them how your body needs to. Some people deal with it by not talking about it and they do hobbies where they go hiking or fishing or running. Some people need to deal with it by talking to a therapist. It doesn't always have to be a critical incident. It can
Mm,
be the years and years of compounded stress where we haven't talked about it. Where now, like I said, the trash can analogy, now it's overflowing. So you should be allowed to go talk to people. But there was times where my partners would call me to suicidal subjects or unfortunately the child crimes. A little 5-year-old girl is probably going to want to talk to a female officer, not a
mm,
male officer. And that's nothing wrong against the male sex, but that's when women can be so utilized. So
mhm,
the pendulum is really, really far swung right now, but I do feel it changing. I do feel the culture of wellness is becoming more accepted. I see a lot more departments that have entire wellness units. I mean, they have
mhm.
deputies and officers assigned to these spots, which is awesome because they're hearing us and they're seeing us and they're taking charge, which is great to be more proactive instead of reactive.
Yeah, I've had some of those folks on the podcast, and it's great to hear what they're doing and to see that they are making a difference. And for those departments that have those wellness units where their officers, their first responders feel supported, there is so much of a better atmosphere there, and they're not losing people, and they're getting people lining up at the door wanting to work for those departments because
Yes.
they know they're going to be supported.
Exactly. It's no surprise that right now the retention and hiring for law enforcement in this country is horrible. It's very, very bad.
Hmm.
And, I thank God that we still have people that are willing to sign up and do this job. I miss it every day, but it's not for me anymore. So I'm trying to do what I can on this side to support those still putting on the vest and the gun belt and still kissing their loved ones goodbye. And I do talk to, chiefs and admin who genuinely want the best for their people, not just the ones that are out there getting pounds of dope and guns and foot pursuits, but they want those people that are going to be here for 10, 20, 30 years
Hmm.
and who are going to be able to tell the community, this is the job you should do because we have command staff that believe in us. They believe in the longevity. The average retirement age for a police officer is 50 to 55. We're only living 3 to 5 years after that. So
Right.
you're working this career where you're missing holidays and birthdays and soccer games, and then you're not even living to enjoy your grandchildren. So if we
Hmm.
can start with the young officers and saying, listen, you're going to see some things, but that's okay. Come to us and we will help you and guide you. You're going to see the next 20 years of our law enforcement being healthier than ever before.
Mhm. So I want to talk a little bit about your recovery, and I know recovery can be a lifetime journey, and it's something that you will probably work on for the rest of your life. And all of us have things that we have to work on. But what specifically for you was that thing that really worked? That was perhaps a tool that you use today, even in keeping yourself on the path to wellness and wholeness.
Well, first and foremost, it was EMDR, being able to compute my trauma into understanding because it was one of the things I struggled with for so many years was why was I so impacted, but my husband's been in shootings and he's okay, or my partners went back to work, why was I so bothered?
Hmm.
And so when I was able to even dig down into my childhood and I understood childhood, I had a great childhood. I have a great mom and dad, but there was things that happened in my childhood that made my experience worse. And if I would have known about the correlation, I could have been steps ahead. So EMDR first and foremost. And one of the things, not everybody loves social media. I don't blame them. Everybody needs to find what works for them. But when I was able to come out and say, this is me, I have toddlers, I also have PTSD, I also have anxiety and depression, and I'm all of these things. I found a community of support that I never even would have thought existed.
Hmm.
I talk to people every day that are so thankful that there is a community online. Like I always talk about it, comfort and community. You have to find your people because, circling back, as law enforcement, you're not allowed to hurt. And then now when we put it in the public and we're being vulnerable and raw, it's like, oh, well, I can feel this way. So the
Hmm.
greatest thing for me over the last couple of years has been being vocal and going to conferences and events and connecting with people and having people come up to me and say, thank you for talking about that because I've been afraid to talk about it for so long. And then I talk to them months later and they're like, yeah, I went back to my department and now we're doing X, Y, and Z. And it's just fulfilling to know that such a dark cloud has turned into a beautiful rainbow and has turned into this beautiful journey that I don't ever wish anybody to go through a near death experience or to deal with PTSD. But when you're able to find that true post traumatic growth and become a better version of yourself, it is just the most fulfilling thing I could ever
Hmm.
do.
That first time you shared your story publicly, first of all, was that hard, and how did you get through that?
It was hard because up until then, I had done stuff like this where it's podcasts or, I'm looking at somebody, but I'm not really getting a reaction. And so
Mhm.
the first time I spoke in public, it was at a women's conference, which was a great icebreaker because women,
Mhm.
we're a
Sure.
little we're a little more gentle and emotional. And it was about 300 people, and it was all law enforcement officers. It was dispatchers, it was fire, EMS, and I remember speaking and looking around the room and being so terrified of seeing people react to me like they're texting, "Oh my gosh, they hate me," or "She's
Mhm.
crying, oh my gosh, I've triggered her," or people are smiling or laughing, and I'm like, I didn't know how to take in all these responses, so I was terrified. But then I got it out of the way, and I spent 30 minutes after my presentation talking to people, and I was like, this is the best community I've ever been a part of. When you go through the academy, these are your brothers and sisters, the thin blue line, we're a family, which is accurate in some departments and not so much in others. But the community of mental health for first responders is so tight knit and so supportive. I immediately was like, this is where I belong. This is where I'm
Mm,
supposed to be.
mhm. Does it become easier, and do you feel yourself healing every time you share your story?
I really do. I think talk therapy and doing it in the way of sharing it for a purpose. I'm actually going to a California Police Chiefs conference in 2 weeks, and knowing I'm going to be speaking in front of chiefs is intimidating, but it's also the best audience because I know they are sitting there to help their people. You can talk to
Mhm,
cops. I've talked to military members, and they're kind of like, yeah, well, I'm okay. I don't really need mental health. But when you
mm,
talk to a room of people that are choosing to be there because they genuinely want the best for their people, it just makes me so full of gratitude and being so thankful that I'm even given these opportunities. So I definitely am still nervous. I try
mm.
and talk myself out of it the whole morning, but I'm very, very thankful for all the doors that have opened for me.
This guy in my film, he's a detective down in Texas, old crusty old detective, swore like a sailor, although he was proud of himself for not dropping an F-bomb in our interview. But he told me that, and he didn't want to be in the film. He did not want to tell his story, but he had a really powerful story. So, and his is just a short little kind of vignette in the middle of the film. But after the film came out, he came to the premiere and he came up and thanked me, said, "Thank you for allowing me to share my story, because now every time I tell it, I heal just a little bit more."
Yes. Yes.
And it was such a powerful thing how telling one story can bring healing. And I don't know how that works, but it seems to work for people.
For me, I mean, I don't want to speak on behalf of anybody else, but for me, the therapy comes from being true to yourself.
Mm,
And again, I keep circling back, but it's like from the minute you start the academy, you almost have this like Superman complex where like things are going to bother me. I'm going to be
mm,
good. This is going to be the greatest career. And then once you start talking about it and I share my suicide attempt and I share, being so afraid of the world and becoming a completely different person, it's validating my feelings, but then also recognizing I'm standing in front of people alive and I'm still
mhm,
here to tell the story. So, yeah, I had really dark days and I had dark months and it was a horrible season of life, but the season has changed and now look. And so it's almost one of those things for me of like gratitude for the hardship because
mm,
now I have something to really base the good days on of like, you know what? Today I took my kids to the park. That's a win because 2 years ago, Megan wouldn't have been able to do that. So it just kind
mm,
of shifts your perspective of I've lived through every single one of my hard days. There has not been
mhm,
one day that has took me down. So what else can there be? I'm good.
mhm. So going back to that incident and the weeks after that, did you have support from your agency?
I did. My agency was very supportive. They were very involved. I had people, checking in on me, bringing food, offering to take my daughter to school. My department was great. They genuinely cared about me. My partners cared about me. I felt like I was I had been given the chance to detach and heal where immediately after I was like, "Oh my gosh, what are they going to think of me? Like, are they going to kick me out? How does this work? Am I fired? Like, I can't go back." And they told me, "Take what you need. Your spot's going to be here. It's okay." And I'm very thankful for that.
Mm. So I want you to speak to someone that I know, and I won't say who they are or where they're from, but she was shot in line of duty and she's struggling. And she's not going back to work because her agency isn't supporting her. Can you speak to her and what just some words of encouragement from your experience?
I know it's very easy to get consumed by what you expect people to do and how you expect people to be. But if you aren't finding your support in your agency, there are other people and other agencies that will give you that support. And there are so many amazing resources at the tip of our fingertips these days where shame on that department for not being there for her, but there's somebody else begging for her to reach out to them. So it's a dangerous tightrope to walk, and I understand that, but I have felt I've felt that, especially through trial. I didn't have the support of my department. I didn't have anybody there sitting on my side when I was cross-examined. And whether that's, life gets busy, things happen, years go by. I get that. I understand the hurt and I understand the anguish, and I will never minimize that. But we heal and we do better when we take the expectation away from people and we reach out to those that want to help. Because sometimes our departments and our agencies don't know what to say, so they say nothing, which is worse. Silence speaks volumes.
Mm.
But I can tell her, anybody else listening, if you message me, I will get you contacted with somebody in 10 minutes. Absolutely. Any time of day. I help people at 2 a.m. I help people during my baby's nap times. There is no excuse to struggle alone when there are so many amazing resources out there now.
Mm. Yeah. Well, what is your message to leadership in law enforcement? What needs to happen to um, just to provide the support that officers need when, whether or not they're in a situation like you were in? What needs to happen from a leadership perspective?
I always like to start with, leadership always thinks that it has to be leading from the front. You have to be this prime example to everybody. But removing the brass and the stars and the stripes and remembering that you were once a young deputy or maybe even a seasoned corporal or sergeant that maybe needed that person. It's okay to connect with your people. I don't like the open door policy because let's face it, nobody is just going to walk into their lieutenant's office and say, "Hey, I'm struggling." I like an open chair policy. Go
Mm.
and sit in briefing, maybe hang out a little bit afterwards. Have the opportunity for people to feel welcomed enough to come to you because it's like if you say, "Let me know what you need," I'm just a call
Mm.
away. How many times do those people call? Never.
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 Yeah.
They are not
Mm.
going to. So if you put yourself out there to, like I said, remove the brass and just be a human, pretend like you're at a barbecue, nobody is going to look at you less for being a deputy's deputy or an officer's officer, but they will remember those command staff that thought that they were on this pedestal and they felt so ashamed to reach out. It's okay to have an entire department or agency where everybody is on the same playing field. I'm friends with the chief in Idaho, and he is so connected to his people. People talk to him in the hallway. They stop him, "Hey, chief, hey, this," because he believes in the longevity of his people. It's not just about having this persona, it's being vulnerable and being real. You will keep your people healthy a lot longer than keeping your stars.
Mm. This past week, I was at IACP in Boston, and I sat in on a session with the chief of police from Toronto, Canada. And they apparently have an amazing wellness program there. I'm trying to get him on the podcast, but he said in his comments that he visits every academy and spends one-on-one time with every single person to let them know that, hey, I am here. I'm here for you. I'm here to serve you.
Yes,
And that makes a huge impact on these young recruits coming through the academy. That the chief of this 8,000 member department, they have 8,000 sworn officers. The chief came and talked to me. That's impactful.
absolutely. Absolutely. I agree with that wholeheartedly. I think it really begins at the academy. I think it begins with telling them, like, yeah, you're signing up to do a noble profession, but some of these calls are going to suck and some of your
Mm.
shifts are going to suck. And that's okay. This is what you do. It's like, when we come to a domestic violence, there's elements you have to meet for a crime.
Mhm.
We should treat mental health the same. Hey, if you start feeling like this, do this, 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 and this. Give them like almost a cheat sheet. Give them a guide where it's not like I'm at the end of my rope and I have the gun in my mouth. Now who do I call? Now what do I do? We should have
Mhm.
addressed this years ago because
Mhm.
I talk to a lot of people and most of the time it's not just that critical incident. It's
Sure.
something little. It's never, it's never just the dishes. You don't come
Hmm.
home and you don't freak out on your kids and your spouse because there's a dish in the sink. It's something else. So
Hmm.
that critical incident could be the tipping point, or it could be that one car accident where it's the tipping point. But if we would have addressed, I call them little T's and big T's. Little T's are, maybe the car accident, you saw some arterial bleeding. Whoa, that was crazy. The big T's are your shootings, your active shooters, maybe multi-vehicle fatality. The little T's should matter just as much as the big T's. And I think that's really when we start the culture shift of recognizing it's okay to be impacted by a really bad domestic violence where maybe that was how your mom was treated when you were growing up, and that's why it's bothering you. It's not because you're weak, it's not because you're less than, but maybe we have some things that we need to work on, and you can go see somebody for that. I think when we have that mentality, we will see people in this career for a lot longer than just 5 to 7 years, and then they're switching jobs because it's too much.
Hmm. What's something that you wish you would have learned at the academy?
That wellness. I mean, I remember having a small block on CIT. It was critical incident training.
Mm.
And I think it was like 32 hours, which was a week. But I can't remember one specific block of instruction where they talked about recognizing the signs of PTSD or recognizing the difference between, trauma and depression and anxiety. And hey, check on your partners if they're, looking a little off, or, just like the warning signs. It's like you look out for the warning signs if somebody's putting their hands in their pocket. They teach you so much on
Mm.
defensive driving and DUIs and, field sobriety training, your testing. But what about the warning signs for ourselves and our partners so
Mm.
that you're not sitting next to an empty chair in briefing because your partner killed himself? So I
Mm.
think if I would have had that, maybe I would have even been able to go back to work. I don't know. It's like the chicken or the egg. What really came first? Was it the trauma? Was it the aftermath? I don't know. I'm thankful to be retired and to be home with my babies, but I loved my job. I genuinely did. So I think if I would have had those tools in my toolkit from the beginning of the academy, maybe my outcome would have been different.
Mhm. And what would you say to an officer, perhaps who they see a fellow officer who's perhaps a little off, a little struggling with something? What should they do?
I think being human and looking for what you would want, it like I said earlier, if you ever text someone like, "Hey, let me know if you need anything," they're never going to tell you. They're not. It's just maybe I don't want to say never because that's a blanket statement. Maybe you'll get one time one person. But I liked if my partners go through a critical incident, I'll text them, "Hey, you have to pick. Either I'm sending DoorDash, I'm going to come fold your laundry, or L give me a chore to do around the house. Is it dishes? Is it vacuuming? Do you want me to have a play date with my kids? Give me something," and they have to pick. So you're giving them the option to still have that control, but you're still having a tangible solution where maybe it's just having somebody there, or, "Hey,
Mhm.
I'm gonna swing by and drop off a coffee. What's your favorite coffee?" Or, "What do you want for lunch today?" Just reminding them that they're not alone, because when you become injured on duty and you're off work, it's very isolating to sit at home knowing your partners are at work. When I was on patrol, we could see each other's locations. If you're on a call for longer than 5 minutes, "Hey, are you okay? What are you doing?" But on your off days at work, that's a cop's most dangerous time. It's not
Mhm.
on duty, it's at home.
Mhm.
And if we can recognize that, hey, maybe this person's dealing with financial issues or, marital issues, just lending that shoulder can make all the difference. And that's what I really try and implement when I go and speak is it doesn't always have to be a great grand party, but just knowing that they're okay. Sometimes it's just coming over and to sit and watch a movie, but
Mhm.
it's having that person that would recognize if you were gone.
Mhm. That's one thing that the officer in my film, she talks about how, you know, on the job, she always had backup. She had people that would show up, just like you said. But when she said, apparently there's no backup at home,
Yep,
when I'm sitting at home struggling, there's no backup. And
absolutely.
so I think that's a theme that kind of keeps recurring in the people that I talk to.
Well, and you think, if I'm at work and it's 2 o'clock in the morning and I just pulled a car over and there's four men versus me, I have no problem jumping on my mic and saying, "Hey,
Mhm.
dispatch, can you send me a back?" nobody is going to think twice. You're probably going to have 3 people show up and say, hey, I got this person. I got that. I have your back. I'm here. But the minute you take the uniform off, you can no longer ask for a back. You
Mm-hmm.
can no longer say like, hey, I need somebody to stand next to me. You think that you have to deal with it all the time, again, because we're ingrained to handle everything and then leave it at work, which
Mm-hmm.
is impossible. You can't do that.
And how important is it to have connections outside of law enforcement, outside of your job?
I think that is so important. I mean, I got sucked into the vacuum too, where, I had high school friends and then all of a sudden I became a cop and now all my friends are cop friends. And after shift or after, the rotation, we would go to dinner and all we talked about was how jacked up this was and how, oh my God, that foot pursuit. And you talk about the absolute worst because we deal with humor in a dark way.
Sure.
We go to a scene where somebody has passed away and we're joking about it because that's how we know to deal with it. Or you're drinking a couple of whiskeys and it's like, oh, I'm good. I'm not going to worry about it. But having the outlet to talk about kids or sports or school or things just like the world other than, this law enforcement bubble, then it really expands your vision into recognizing that it is a job and it is a career, but there's so much more than just this. And you're able to take the blinders off. So that's one thing that I wish I would have done better on is keeping my friends and keeping the contact. But, it's hard when you're working 12-hour shifts 3 or 4 days a week. It's difficult. And when you become a cop or a firefighter or a dispatcher, you change. There's aspects of your being that are different. And some people don't always resonate with that.
Well, as we wrap up, I want you to kind of take a final word to all the first responders who are watching and listening to this podcast. What would you say to them?
Well, first and foremost, I know it's a thankless job and I know we all, get a little weird when people say thank you, but I could no longer do the job. And I know that there's thousands of people out there that are walking through similar paths, but they're still showing up for people like me in my community. So thank you. And if there's a need for help, please know that it is out there. You don't have to go to just your department's peer support. You don't have to just go to your counselor. If you need an outside view, message me, call me, text me. If you don't want to talk to me, like I said, I will find somebody within 10 minutes, 100% guaranteed. There is so much help out there that genuinely want the best for our law enforcement and for our first responders that you should never have to walk through the path like I did. You shouldn't.
And how can people get in touch with you? How can they find you? Do you have a website or any social sites that we can connect people with?
I do. It's www.MeaganMcCarthyIt.com. I have resources on there. I also am on Instagram and LinkedIn. It's just my name. So if there's ever a need for anything, please reach out. Here I go with saying, if you need something, let me know. But I genuinely mean that. My messages are always open and this is what I've dedicated my life to. So I'm willing and able to help whoever I can.
Well, Meagan, I'm so grateful that you're on the program, and I'm grateful that you're still here and that you're making a difference for first responders around the world through your work. So thank you.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, Meagan, for being an advocate for wellness. If you want to learn more about Meagan and connect with her, I've put a link to her website in the show notes. Thank you for listening or for watching. Just a reminder that I'm here every Wednesday with a brand new podcast episode, so be sure to tune in again next week. And please remember, you are not alone. And if you need someone to talk to and don't know where you can turn, you can dial 988 for help. Until next time, be well, take care of yourself and those around you, and go out and do something great in the world.